My cousin tricked my parents into signing over their business to him and sneered, "I own everything now." My parents were devastated until my grandfather's old friend walked in and said, "Actually, there's a clause in the contract you should read." My cousin's smug face instantly turned to panic. Let me tell you how my cousin tried to steal everything my parents built for decades, and how we destroyed him with a single sentence. My parents ran a successful family business for over 30 years. It wasn't some massive corporation, but it was our livelihood. A mid-sized manufacturing company based in Chicago, providing high-quality metal parts to local industries. My dad started it from scratch, working insane hours to grow it into something stable, something that could support our family. My mom handled the books, the contracts, the logistics. Together, they built something incredible. And then my cousin decided he wanted it for himself. Let me introduce the main players in this disaster: my parents, honest, hardworking, the kind of people who still believe in handshakes and family loyalty. Me, their only child, and fiercely protective of them. I was working at a law firm at the time, but I stayed involved in the family business whenever I could. My cousin, Tyler. A smug, entitled snake. He had always been like this, spoiled, lazy, and always looking for the easy way up. He had a business degree, barely, but no actual skills. He wasn't interested in work, just in wealth. My grandfather's old friend, Richard. He'd been around since my dad was a kid, almost like family, but more importantly, he was one of the sharpest businessmen I'd ever met. Now, here's how Tyler pulled off his little scam. My parents had always wanted to retire someday, and Tyler latched onto this. He started buttering them up, acting like he cared about the future of the business. He told them he wanted to keep it in the family, that he admired what they built. My parents, ever trusting, believed him. Over months, he wore them down. He talked about how complicated selling a business could be, how outside buyers wouldn't care about the legacy, how they might get screwed over. Then he suggested something simple: they could just transfer ownership to him. He'd pay them a generous salary for their retirement, and in return, he'd take over and keep things running smoothly. At first, my parents hesitated, but Tyler was relentless. He played the good son act perfectly. He even got his sleazy lawyer friend to draft up an agreement, full of legal jargon meant to lull my parents into a false sense of security. Tyler insisted it was just a formality, just a paper transaction that would keep things easy for everyone. And then, one day, he had them sign the papers. They thought they were signing an ownership transfer with conditions, but what they really signed was a full-blown sale, with no conditions. The moment their signatures hit the paper, Tyler legally owned everything. And the first thing he did? He turned to them with a smug grin and said, "I own everything now." Just like that. No warmth, no gratitude. Just pure arrogance. My parents were in shock. My dad went pale. My mom asked him what he meant, and Tyler pulled out a second document, one they had never seen before. It was an agreement nullifying their salary and benefits. The moment ownership transferred, they lost everything. He had tricked them. And he was loving every second of it. Tyler went on a little speech about how they should have been smarter, how business is survival of the fittest, and how he was the future. He had this sneer on his face like he enjoyed watching them break. My dad looked like he was going to have a heart attack. My mom actually started crying, and let me tell you, I had never seen her cry before. I was shaking with rage. I wanted to strangle him. But before I could say anything, before I could do anything, someone else spoke up. A deep, steady voice from the doorway. "Actually, there's a clause in the contract you should read." We all turned. And there stood Richard. Richard had been my grandfather's closest friend, a man who had seen decades of business deals, betrayals, and schemes. He was sharp as a knife, and he was smiling. Tyler's smug face faltered. "What clause?" he snapped. Richard stepped forward, calm as ever. "The reversion clause." Tyler blinked. "The what?" Richard sighed, as if talking to a child. "The clause that says if ownership changes under false pretenses, the deal is void. Your uncle," he motioned to my dad, "is still the rightful owner." Silence. A deep, terrible silence. Then Tyler laughed. It was shaky, fake. "That's nonsense. There's no such thing in the contract." Richard handed him a copy of the agreement. A real copy. "Page 12, he said. I had never seen someone go from confident to terrified so fast. Tyler's eyes scanned the document, and his face drained of color. It was real. He had been so cocky, so sure of himself, that he hadn't even read the fine print. And that's when the real fun began. Tyler's hands shook as he reread the clause, his face turning from smug to sickly pale. His mouth opened, then closed. He tried to form words, but nothing came out. He was trapped. I felt a surge of satisfaction watching him crumble. But this wasn't over. Not yet. My dad, still shaken, finally spoke. What does this mean? His voice was hoarse, like he was forcing the words through sheer will. Richard turned to him, calm as ever. It means this contract is worthless. He flicked the papers in Tyler's hands. The clause states that if you, he looked at my parents, were misled, coerced, or manipulated under false pretenses, ownership reverts back to you. A long, stretched silence. Then Tyler snapped. This is bullsh*t, he shouted, slamming the document onto the table. His face was twisted in rage, eyes darting around as if searching for a way out. That clause wasn't in the contract I signed. You changed it. Richard didn't flinch. No, we didn't. You just didn't bother reading the full document. Tyler's nostrils flared. He looked to his lawyer, a slimy guy named Greg, who had been standing in the corner this whole time, shifting nervously. Do something. Tyler hissed at him. Greg looked even paler than Tyler. He was flipping through his own copy of the contract, sweat beading on his forehead. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered, "It's real. It's in there." Boom. Tyler's entire body tensed, his breathing ragged. So what? That doesn't mean anything. I still have legal control. Richard sighed, shaking his head. No, Tyler. It means you committed fraud. And that means you don't just lose the business, he leaned in slightly. You could be facing criminal charges. The room froze. Tyler's bravado crumbled. His face twitched, his hands clenched into fists, and I could see the panic setting in. He tried to pivot. Look, we're family, he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. I was just trying to keep the business in the family. I didn't mean any harm. My dad, who had been silent all this time, suddenly slammed his fist on the table. You stole from us. Tyler jumped like he had been shot. I had never seen my dad that angry. My mom wiped her tears and spoke, her voice cold as steel. You wanted everything for yourself, Tyler. And you thought we were too stupid to stop you. Tyler's lips pressed together, but then he straightened his back, trying to regain control. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. You want the company? Take it back. Whatever. He shrugged like it was no big deal, but I could see the rage boiling beneath the surface. But Richard wasn't done. Oh no, Tyler. You don't just walk away from this. Tyler's eyes snapped to him. What the hell does that mean? Richard smiled, slow, deliberate. You used fraud to take control of a business worth millions. Do you really think there won't be consequences? Greg, the sleazy lawyer, suddenly grabbed his briefcase. I need to go. Tyler turned to him, panicked. Greg, what the F***ck are you doing? Greg didn't even look at him. He practically ran out of the office. That's when Tyler really started losing it. You can't do this, he shouted. I didn't do anything illegal. This was just a misunderstanding. You can't prove I had bad intentions. Richard raised an eyebrow. Really? Because the moment you took control, you nullified your aunt and uncle's salary, locked them out, and declared, I own everything now. He smirked. That seems pretty clear to me. Tyler's face turned red. Screw you, he spat. You're all just trying to screw me over. I folded my arms, staring him down. You did this to yourself. Tyler was breathing heavily, like a trapped animal. He turned to my parents, his voice suddenly pleading. Uncle, Auntie, come on. You're really gonna let some outsider decide this? We're family. Let's just forget this ever happened. My dad didn't even hesitate. You stopped being family the second you stole from us. Tyler flinched. Then his face hardened. And then he did something insane. With a wild look in his eyes, he suddenly grabbed the contract, the real one, and tore it in half. Shreds of paper flew in the air. There, he yelled. Now it's gone. No contract, no problem. For a second, there was stunned silence. Then Richard actually laughed. A slow, deep, mocking laugh. You think that matters? Richard chuckled. We have digital copies, Tyler. Hell, we have multiple hard copies. All you did was destroy your own evidence. Tyler froze. His breathing got shallow. He looked at the torn paper in his hands like he had just realized what he had done. And then the final nail in the coffin came. Richard pulled out his phone. I hope you weren't planning on lying in court, because, he turned the screen toward us. It was a recording. Crystal clear audio of Tyler's voice saying, I own everything now. He had been recorded the entire time. Tyler made a strangled noise in his throat. He looked at me, then my parents, then Richard. His hands trembled. His whole body sagged, like the weight of his own stupidity was finally crushing him. Then, without another word, he ran. He actually bolted out of the office like a man being chased by demons. I watched him go, and for the first time that day, I let myself breathe. But this wasn't over. Tyler might have lost this round, but he was vindictive. And I had a gut feeling he wasn't done causing trouble. I turned to my dad. We need to make sure he can't do any more damage. Richard nodded. I think it's time to get the authorities involved. And just like that, the real war began. Tyler bolted out of the office like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. For a moment, everything was quiet. My parents were still processing what had just happened, my mom's hands trembling, my dad breathing heavily like he was trying to calm himself. Richard, ever composed, watched the door with mild amusement. But I wasn't amused. Because I knew Tyler. And Tyler wasn't the type to accept defeat. He was the type to burn everything down if he couldn't have it. I turned to Richard. We need to lock everything down. Right now. Richard nodded. Agreed. He's desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. My dad, still shaken, looked at me. What do you mean? He lost. He can't do anything now. I exhaled, trying to keep my voice calm. Dad, Tyler just realized he committed fraud. He's backed into a corner. And I guarantee you, he's not running away to cool off. He's running to cause more damage. And I was right. Because not 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Tyler had just tried to withdraw every single dollar from the company's accounts. Tyler's last-ditch effort to steal everything. I nearly crushed my phone in my hand. He's trying to drain the company's money. Richard swore under his breath. He pulled out his own phone and immediately started making calls. I'm freezing the accounts. At the same time, I called our bank's fraud department. I barely got my name out before the representative interrupted. We were just about to call you. A man matching your cousin's description just attempted to transfer all company funds to a private offshore account. Of course he did. Tyler had spent months planning this. He must have set up a secret account ahead of time, just in case. But he made one critical mistake. The contract transfer hadn't gone through yet. Because of the fraud clause, the business was still legally in my dad's name, meaning Tyler had no legal authority over the accounts. I felt a dark satisfaction when the bank rep said, "We've locked the accounts and flagged this for attempted fraud." Tyler had just screwed himself even harder. But he wasn't done. The office break-in just when I thought things couldn't get crazier, my phone rang again. This time, it was the night security guard from our business headquarters. "Sir, we have a situation." My stomach dropped. What kind of situation? A pause. Then, your cousin just broke into the building. My blood turned to ice. What? He used his old keycard. He's in the main office right now, going through files. I grabbed my keys. Call the cops. Now. Richard had already heard enough. He was dialing another number. I'll handle legal. You get over there before he destroys anything. I didn't need to be told twice. I raced to the office, my heart pounding. Tyler was really going for a scorched earth approach. And when I arrived, I realized he had gone completely unhinged. Cousin or not, I was done playing nice. I walked into chaos. Tyler had trashed my dad's office. Papers were scattered everywhere. Filing cabinets were open, contents dumped onto the floor. He was frantically going through documents, muttering to himself. His face was sweaty, wild-eyed. I stepped into the room, my voice cold. Looking for something, Tyler? He spun around, startled. Then his face twisted into a sneer. You. I crossed my arms. You just added breaking and entering to your list of crimes. Hope it was worth it. Tyler laughed, but it wasn't cocky anymore. It was manic. You think you've won? You think you can just take this from me? I shook my head. You took it from yourself. His face twitched. You don't get it. I was supposed to be the one in charge. I was supposed to be the one with everything. Not you. Not your pathetic parents. And that's when I realized, this was never about the business. It was about control. Tyler had always resented my parents' success. He had spent his life convinced he was the golden child of the family, the one who deserved wealth and power. And when he saw my parents thriving, while he was just another mediocre businessman, it ate him alive. So he decided to take it. And when that failed, he decided to destroy it. But he underestimated one thing. I wasn't afraid of him. And I was done letting him ruin lives. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. You're finished, Tyler. The police are on their way. And when they get here, you're going to prison. His eyes darted around like a trapped rat. His breathing got heavier. Then, in one last act of desperation, he lunged for my dad's computer. He was trying to wipe the company's digital records. I moved without thinking. I grabbed his arm and slammed him into the desk. Papers went flying. Tyler let out a strangled yell, trying to shove me off, but I was done playing fair. I twisted his arm behind his back and pressed him down. You are not walking away from this. He struggled, but he was weak. Tyler had always relied on his schemes, never his strength. And I had too much adrenaline, too much rage, to let him go. Then, sirens. Flashing red and blue lights filled the windows. And that's when it hit him. This was real. The cops stormed in, guns drawn, barking orders. I let go and stepped back as they yanked Tyler up and slammed him against the wall. You're under arrest for fraud, attempted theft, and breaking and entering. Tyler started screaming. No. This isn't fair. This is my company. You can't do this. I just watched, arms crossed, as they dragged him out kicking and cursing. The aftermath, the fallout was brutal. Tyler was charged with multiple counts of fraud and corporate theft. The bank's fraud department and the police had enough evidence to bury him in legal trouble for years. Greg, his sleazy lawyer, flipped on him immediately. He cut a deal to save himself, admitting that Tyler had planned this scheme for months. The family disowned Tyler completely. Even his own parents refused to defend him after they saw what he had done. And my parents? They got their business back. Fully, completely, legally. Richard handled all the legal cleanup, and my parents were finally able to breathe again. As for Tyler? He spent the next 6 years behind bars. And when he got out? Nobody was waiting for him. Tyler spent the next few months rotting in jail, waiting for trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Fraud, attempted theft, breaking and entering, and even tampering with corporate records, the charges stacked up like bricks sealing his fate. And yet, somehow, he still thought he could weasel his way out. From jail, he sent letters to my parents, begging them to drop the charges. First, he tried playing the victim, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that he got caught up in the excitement of taking over and never meant to hurt anyone. When that didn't work, he switched to threats. If you don't fix this, I'll make sure you regret it. I know things about the company. Things that could cause problems for you. My dad read the letter, then calmly tossed it in the shredder. Tyler still hadn't learned. Destroying Tyler's reputation, for good. Tyler always saw himself as a big-shot businessman. Even before this mess, he had spent years trying to climb the corporate world, networking with investors, pretending he was someone important. So I decided to make sure he never worked in business again. With Richard's help, we gathered every piece of evidence we had on Tyler's fraud, emails, contracts, bank records, even the security footage of him breaking into the office. And then? We sent it to everyone he had ever worked with. Former employers. Business associates. Investment groups. Every single person who had ever considered working with Tyler. It didn't take long before his name was blacklisted from every major company in the industry. Nobody wanted to be associated with a fraudster who stole from his own family. And just for good measure, we published his arrest in the local business journal. A full article detailing exactly what he had done, how he tried to con his own uncle and aunt, how he broke into the office, how he got caught trying to drain the company's accounts. His name was ruined. By the time he was out on bail, he had no job, no prospects, and no future. The trial, watching him squirm when the trial finally arrived, I made sure to be there every single day. I wanted him to see me, sitting in the courtroom, watching as his life collapsed around him. The prosecution tore him apart. They showed the recording of him saying, "I own everything now," in court. Tyler tried to argue it was taken out of context, but his own lawyer looked embarrassed to be representing him. Greg, his so-called friend and lawyer? He testified against him. Admitted under oath that Tyler had planned the fraud for months, thinking my parents were too old and dumb to notice. The jury barely needed any time to deliberate. Guilty. Tyler was sentenced to 6 years in prison. And the best part? Because of the fraud and damages he caused, he was also ordered to pay restitution. Over $250,000. Money he didn't have. The final nail in the coffin. Tyler spent every last penny he had on legal fees, thinking he could somehow win. But when he lost, he had nothing left. His credit was wrecked. His career was dead. His reputation was ruined. And worst of all, his own family had abandoned him. Even his parents, who had always coddled him, refused to help. They were humiliated by what he had done. When he finally got out of prison 6 years later, he had nothing waiting for him. No job. No money. No allies. Where is he now? Last I heard, Tyler was working a minimum wage job at a gas station, barely scraping by. The man who once sneered, "I own everything now," was now stocking shelves and mopping floors. And my parents? They thrived. With Richard's help, they expanded the business and eventually sold it for millions, on their terms. They retired comfortably, knowing that the company they built was safe from vultures like Tyler. As for me, I made sure to send Tyler a Christmas card every year. Nothing too cruel, just a simple message, "Hope you're doing well." You should have read the fine print.